Hello.
1, 2, 1, 2. Is that okay?
Testing.
1, 2.
Are we ready to go?
1. It's a bit loud, isn't it?
It's a little bit loud. We're just getting our volumes ready, just adjusting our levels. Just as you all settle down now. Right? Is
1,
that
2.
okay?
1, 2. Is it too loud now?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. Okay, when those people over in the corner have settled down. Well, ladies and gentlemen, what a wonderful thing to see you all here on this lovely evening after we've been having some pretty shocking evenings. Now, before we start, can I just ask for a show of hands? Who has a mobile phone within 3 feet of them that they own? Okay, can you just make sure they're on silent, please? Thank you. I don't know about you and your relationship to your mobile phone, but I'm very fond of my mobile phone. And I was just listing down before I came down some of the things that it is for me. A diary, a calendar, a camera, photo library, radio, even television, podcasts for listening to, music, telephone, text messaging, notification reminders, news feed, dictionary, encyclopedia. You get the idea. And of course, a conduit for social media. Now, I don't know if you saw last Sunday week, the weatherman, the BBC weatherman called Simon King. He was over in Salford, and apparently Simon has got to do the breakfast TV weather at 7:45, and then he has to run upstairs to do the national TV weather at 8 o'clock. But they were late breaking to him for the 7:45 one, and he had to run out and run up the stairs. And when he went to do the second broadcast, he looked like he was having a panic attack. It's all, you can look it up on your phones later on. I heard him interviewed on Pick of the Week the other day, and he was saying that within minutes of this thing happening, he was flooded with hundreds and hundreds of well-being messages, people concerned for his well-being. And I thought, well, isn't that a lovely thing to have the phone in his pocket so he can get all those messages to help him feel good. But then I also noticed, won't be long, Raj.
Shall I go?
I noticed a write-up in The Guardian about the best-selling, the Sunday Times best-selling book of the year, which is called Anxious Generation, how the great rewiring of childhood is causing an epidemic of mental illness. So I guess this gives us an idea that there's a lot to this topic. Here we have with us tonight somebody who will be not known to most of you, I'm sure. And as I look at his introduction up on the screen there, I think, I guess, in latter years you might know Roger because of the Rossnager property and all that, but I'm sure we all have our stories about when we first met Roger. I have a story about when I first met Roger. I first met Roger in 1994 over at Holyhead South Stack, where he was in charge of taking a group of unsuspecting parents with their children to terrify the living Jesus out of them by having them descend down this really steep sort of rock face and jump into the water and swim into a cave. Am I right? You remember? And I thought, well, here's a man who's got a sense of adventure. And of course, Roger is well known to us all. He's been entertaining us for years, and now he's chomping at the bit to get going and waiting for me to shut up. So I pass you over to Roger Shoesmith. Give him a warm round of applause.
Thanks, Bill. We'll press on, shall we? Whether it is to be Utopia or Oblivion will be a touch-and-go relay race right up to the final moment. That was Buckminster Fuller speaking on social media. about social media. And then Sophocles said, "Nothing vast enters the life of mortals without a curse." So I left Facebook and I wrote my final post in the form of a letter to Mark Zuckerberg. And I posted it on the 19th of April, 2017. I also wrote a song about it called Happy, in inverted commas, with a question mark. It goes like this. Not the song, the post. I won't read it all, I'll read some of it out to you. Dear Mr. Zuckerberg, I've decided to unsubscribe from Facebook and thought I would explain as far as possible my reasons for doing so. My initial subscription was precipitated by a requirement to keep in touch with my kids, who were at the time working or travelling abroad. Facebook was by far the best tool. The site was easily navigable, intuitive, and more importantly, cool. A non-commercial, non-intimidatory portal cleverly designed to suck people into the warm bosom of social media. Over time, the business seems to have grown exponentially and has clearly become the antithesis of what it originally purported to be. Some good words in here. It's now an advertising platform. The geometric model which social media describes has made Facebook a powerful marketing machine. I admit to being a consumer and not a contributor. And as I trawl through my news feed, I discovered that I have become increasingly frustrated, yet strangely reluctant to stop scrolling. Addiction? ? I'm less happy at the end of a session than I was at the beginning. This might strike a chord with others, but there again, I might be the only one. We should all respect those who choose to contribute, whilst at the same time considering the motivation behind the vast majority of posts, and perhaps the harm to others that these posts might cause. The achievements of beautiful children, cute pets, exotic holidays, a plate of food for God's sake. I can't help thinking that this "look how happy I am" culture is in some cases causing us to lose sight of reality. Then there's the scary side, which I've only read about: incitement to violence, radicalization, racism, grooming and bullying, all of which seems to be endemic. Facebook, in my humble opinion, has lost its way. Street performers balancing a coconut on their heads is all that's left in there for me. So for that reason, I'm out. A fond farewell to all my friends. See you in real life. So that was my letter to Mr. Zuckerberg, who sadly didn't reply. So I'm not saying that social media is all bad. Of course it's not. People owe their lives and their happiness to it in one form or another. It's helped reunite families where people have been missing for years. It's been instrumental in finding organ donors, etc., etc. Never did we think that a few hundred 20 to 35-year-old white guys in California would be affecting and influencing nearly 3 billion people all over the planet. If this is a business, what is the product? If you're not paying for the product, perhaps you are the product. The gradual and hardly noticeable changes in your behavior and perception, that is the product. This market trades in human futures, and your behavior is the currency. There are only two industries that call their customers users: drugs and software. Donald Trump, with the use of social media, urged his followers to march down Pennsylvania Avenue towards the Capitol. Another group of people on the other side of the country, in the offices of Twitter, were charged with the task of monitoring content and removing unsavory posts whilst watching the anarchy unfold. "Execute Mike Pence" was one of the tweets, which had to be immediately removed. After something like 190 bogus or inflammatory tweets from Donald Trump himself, the Twitter executives decided to cancel Trump's account. It was the first time since the burning of Washington in 1812 that the Capitol had come under attack. Hundreds of people were injured and 7 died in the uprising. But something else happened that day for the first time. Millions of people saw the power of the tech giants. they can change the course of history. They can delete you, they can amplify you, they can silence presidents, they can change your life. The tech titans get to decide what we see and when we see it. Over the next, I was going to say half an hour, but I've probably not got time now. Thanks.
You've all the time in the world.
I'll do my best to explain how this utopian dream of forming a community and connecting everyone to each other took shape over the last 30 years and what it has now become. I'll leave you to debate what measures, if any, should be taken to head off what I believe might be an approaching apocalypse. In the late 60s, a community of so-called hippies came into existence in California. These were young people who were suspicious of government, anti-war, and rejected consumerist values. Probably took hallucinatory drugs and free love, and you get it. In order to help these idealistic hippies, in 1968, an American project developer called Stuart Brand published a magazine called the Whole Earth Catalogue. This was a consumer guide to the best way to be a participant in these communities. What tool you need to dig a latrine in the forest, how to set up a shelter, the best pocket knife to buy, etc. The thing about this publication was that the readers got to recommend stuff for possible inclusion in the next edition. Steve Jobs told students in a lecture at Stanford University in 2005 that the Whole Earth Catalogue was the Bible of his generation, and he compared it with the Google of today. It wasn't politics, protest, or lobbying that would change the world. It was access to information. In 1984, Bill Gates and Steve Jobs were starting to market home computers. An elite group of people would now be able to access a thing called the internet in the comfort of their own home. Next slide. A young epidemiologist called Larry Brilliant, believe it or not, and looking at that slide, it's a good job he wasn't called Arthur, realizing that the Whole Earth Catalogue community was only a few thousand strong, might benefit from new home computers and this new electronic thing called the internet. He arranged to meet with Stuart Brand, and together they formed the WELL, the Whole Earth Electronic Link. If you were able to get online, this was the only place to go for an interesting conversation. You could have a conversation with somebody without knowing whether they were black or white, short or tall, male or female. This was when the magic of the social media concept started to emerge. The new platform and the original catalogue shared a radical vision. Hitherto, the newspaper and TV magnates had decided upon what information was made available to us, the people. Brand's Whole Earth Catalogue had started to change all that. The internet would finish the job. The Well was the first social media platform, and the ancestor of Facebook, Twitter, Google, TikTok, and the rest of them. A social revolution based on the crazy idea that everyone should have access to everything all of the time. In the early days, around 1990, there were only a few thousand participants, and there was an unspoken agreement regarding behavior within the community. You owned your own words. As millions of people started logging on, what happens is that you get the best of humanity and you get the worst. Some of them were starting to post things that weren't very nice. The case of Stratton Oakmont in 1993 became something of a landmark. They were a New York-based investment company, and following a particularly profitable spell, people started posting inflammatory content on a chat room platform called Prodigy. Amongst other things, they accused the company of illegal activity. I think we call it trolling now. It was before trolling was invented, this. Stratton Oakmont sued Prodigy Services. Prodigy thought they would win, as there had been a similar case some months prior to this against a similar platform called CompuServe. The judge ruled that CompuServe was not liable for the content on their platform. They were simply a delivery service. However, Prodigy billed itself as a family-friendly company, endeavouring to keep harmful content off their platform. The judge in this case, in 1995, decided that Prodigy were liable as they had edited content and in doing so had unknowingly become a publisher and were legally liable for what they carried on their sites. So the message there is, leave all the bad stuff on and you'll be fine. Try and clean it up and you'll be sued. A US senator then, by the name of Christopher Cox, after hearing about the Prodigy ruling, set about formulating legislation to deal with the matter of online content. He realized that the Prodigy case meant that the whole industry was facing a mountain of litigation and the social media concept was effectively doomed. He came up with 26 words called Section 230. No, gone the wrong way. It formed part of the Communications Decency Act and was signed into law by Bill Clinton in 1996. It became the main legal basis for every social media company forever. Nobody predicted just how controversial these 26 words would become. No provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. So that kind of opened the gates a little bit. In 2004, Mark Zuckerberg launched Facebook. 2 years later, in 2006, everyone was talking about Steve Jobs. He was rumored to be working on a new project called the iPhone Bill. Just round about this time, Roger McNamee, the head of Silicon Valley's biggest tech investment fund, got a call from Facebook's admin team. Would you be prepared to have a confidential meeting with Mr. Zuckerberg? Facebook was 2 years old, had around 9 million users, and was penniless. The meeting was called to discuss the next move in terms of the company's trajectory, and McNamee said that the next thing to happen would probably be an offer from one of the bigger internet players. Mark Zuckerberg would then have to make a decision, take the money or pursue a dream and grow the company to reach hundreds of millions of people. He said, I've just been offered $1 billion by Yahoo. Took 5 minutes to think about it and then made his decision to decline the offer. All that was left was to find a way of making some money. The solution to this conundrum would change the internet forever. Facebook was desperately trying to stay afloat and was doubling in size every few months. There's a term in the tech world known as blitz scaling. The company was concentrating all its resources on growth. First America, then the West, then the world. This is roughly when social media lost its sense of intuition for the end users. They then figured out how to use data to obtain growth and launched their user retention scheme with teams who used to use all sorts of tricks to keep people engaged. All Facebook was doing to achieve exponential growth was working out why people click on things. Another tech giant down the road is showing us all how it's done. Google was taking the data from online searches and turning it into something advertisers can use. A little-known Google executive called Sheryl Sandberg launched AdWords, a cost-per-click model which could personalize adverts in a way that had never been done before. Google's revenue went from 10 billion to over 20 billion during her tenure. Google knew about your searches, but Facebook was learning about you. In 2008, Facebook was running at around 200 million users. The amount of data that Facebook was collecting meant that it could build an intimate picture of every single one of us. Where we went to school, where we go on holiday, the people we talk to, what our hobbies are, our likes and dislikes. Sheryl Sandberg knew that advertisers would go crazy for this. so she agreed to become Mark Zuckerberg's number 2. At this point, Facebook was still operating at a loss. 1 year later, it had made $777 million. Data became the new oil, and new social media companies started to pop up. Tumblr, Pinterest, Snapchat, Twitter, they all shared one philosophy. More connections and more sharing really will help the world, no matter who you are or where you are. It's also, conveniently, a good way to make a lot of money. You could be a countercultural hippie and a billionaire at the same time. In 2007, Steve Jobs launched the iPhone. No, that's not him, is it? That's our friend. Launched the iPhone. Suddenly this meant... Oh, hang on. Where am I going? There he is. Suddenly, this meant that you could carry the internet with you in your pocket everywhere. Barack Obama seemed to play a major part in this revolution. One of the Facebook co-founders, Chris Hughes, ran his election campaign. My name is Barack Obama, and I'm the guy who got Mark Zuckerberg to wear a jacket and tie. No surprise that Obama won the 2008 election. Soon after that, Twitter and YouTube were praised for kickstarting the Arab Spring and the Occupy Wall Street campaigns. The power of these social media platforms was starting to be recognized. At the height of the tech optimism, it all started to fall apart. It wasn't long before we started being rude to each other and posting unpleasant content, and then there were the racists, the misogynists, turning up and causing all sorts of trouble. On the plus side, the platforms started to set rules about what was allowed on their sites. At Facebook, for instance, they came up with ways of making it easier for teenagers to report bullying. There was a genuine attempt to protect users from the bad things, but this itself created a tension in the industry because they still had to attract users and collect data for advertisers. They had to keep us engaged. At Facebook, this was the most central metric within the company. If a Facebook employee wanted to do something to increase engagement, they could do it with little or no authority. They would actually be incentivized and rewarded for increasing engagement. The tension within Facebook between harm and engagement was starting to cause problems. Big Tech said that harmful posts were unintended consequences of encouraging engagement. Mark Zuckerberg banged on about eggs and omelettes. Chris Weatherall started at Twitter in 2009, and he noticed that users were reposting other people's tweets and manually writing RT against each post. As a result, he designed the sharing retweet button to make it easier and quicker for users to disseminate information through the system quickly, a natural progression for Twitter. For example, if there was an earthquake, this tool would be able to inform millions of users in seconds, geometric progression. This simple little retweet button was one of the most important technological innovations in the last 20 years. Retweets can make headlines and move markets, but at the time it was simply a tech solution to a clunky software issue. Of course then, it was all fine because there weren't any heads of state on Twitter. In 2016, the social media giants are about to get dragged into the most controversial landscape of all, politics. A journalist called Maria Ressa was preparing for a presidential election in her home country of the Philippine Islands. Maria runs Rappler, the Philippines' biggest online news site, which started in 2011. In 2013, the Philippines had been targeted by Facebook's voracious growth team, and by 2014, 80% of internet users were on the platform in the Philippines, which is a lot of people. Suddenly, Facebook's community pages are filling up with posts reporting muggings, burglaries, and drug-related crimes. All these posts were suggesting that the country needs a tough new president. Maybe somebody like Rodrigo Duterte, who promised to treat drug addicts and dealers in the same way as Hitler treated the Jews. When these postings were investigated, they discovered that there were no communities under siege by drug addicts and criminals. What they did find was 26 accounts that were intertwined. All the accounts were false, and this fake news network became dubbed the sock puppet scandal. All 26 accounts were part of a pro-Duterte group. The scary thing is that these 26 accounts were reaching at least 3 million users. How could a social media company make a decision on whether something is true or not? By the summer of 2016, Donald Trump had surprised everyone by becoming the Republican candidate to take on Hillary Clinton for the presidency of the United States. A researcher called Lawrence Alexander came across a cluster of websites, mostly pro-Trump English language websites. The domain names had been registered by a group of people living in a small town in North Macedonia called Velez. For a few months in 2016, this ex-industrial town became one of the most exciting digital marketing hubs in the world. It started with a group of youngsters who set up groups on Facebook which dealt with interesting topics such as cars and motorbikes, interesting to them. The more interesting the topic, the more clicks it received. The group then started to fire off a constant stream of clickbait stories to generate yet more traffic. Whether these stories are true or false is irrelevant. What matters is how engaging they are. And if people were clicking, the Facebook algorithm will do the rest. This activity started to spread amongst the young population of Velez until they realized that fake stories don't have to be about motorbikes, they can be about politics. This small community in North Macedonia started to make fortunes as the US election grew closer. They didn't care about politics or elections, truth or falsehoods. All they cared about was clicks. The more misleading, the better. The youngsters of Velez were then driving around in expensive cars and wearing designer suits. They were not breaking any rules. They had just figured out how the Facebook business model works. Facebook later admitted that they were not prepared for what happened in 2016. The point is that Facebook could not distinguish between a fake story from Velez and, for example, a serious article for a magazine. Just as they couldn't distinguish between a pro-Duterte sock puppet post and a real person. It was all the same. What mattered to Facebook was engagement. Removing harmful content from Facebook is one thing. Deciding what is true or not in a political debate is quite another category of responsibility. As Maria Ressa thought, Rodrigo Duterte won a landslide victory in the Philippines. Maria published a story about the 26 sock puppet accounts, revealing the disinformation as a result was attacked online by trolls. September 2016, the information landscape is a mess. Trump is behind in the polls, but surging rapidly. The data tells us that social media was rewarding falsehoods, and there was nothing to rein it in. In this election, the Trump supporters used fake news more successfully than anyone else. The most popular story of all in late 2016 was that Pope Francis endorses Donald Trump for president. Zuckerberg denied that Facebook has anything to do with the result of the 2016 election. In January 2017, the US intelligence agency declassified a report. It showed that 129 million Facebook users interacted with Russian propaganda pumped out by the Internet Research Agency. Zuckerberg, when questioned by the US Senate, admitted to being slow to recognize the Russian interference in the 2016 election. A man called Ian Russell thinks that in 2016, his youngest daughter, Molly, started looking at online content about depression and self-harm, and he became concerned. He monitored some of her activity online and made numerous complaints to Facebook, Instagram, and Pinterest about some of the content and asked them to take stuff down. At this time, social media platforms were promising to clean up more than ever before. What if the problem is not just content? What if the problem is the very design of social media itself? In 2016, Instagram introduced a new way of displaying content. Instead of chronologically based feed, they replaced it with algorithmically based feed, which is designed to put the important stuff at the top. These algorithms were designed to show you more of what you liked based entirely on your previous behavior. As it turns out, 13-year-old Molly was consuming more and more content about depression and self-harming. Once you've seeded your algorithm, you can't turn it off. It'll hunt you down. It will become relentless. The same images over and over. Amazingly, none of this was breaking the rules, as the algorithm is merely recommending content and doesn't care who it recommends it to. In this case, it's to a 13-year-old vulnerable girl. The recommendation engine is the problem. In November 2017, the Russell family were all at home, having an evening meal and watching the telly. All seemed perfectly normal. That night, Molly took her own life, aged 14. For weeks after, Facebook and Pinterest kept sending self-harm and suicide content to her phone. The coroner's evidence uncovered some pretty ugly stuff in amongst Molly's normal posts. Here are 10 depression pins you might like. These bleak posts of life-sucking content were pushed to her, often algorithmically, and the combined force of those posts meant that she didn't really stand a chance. Molly's case should have been enough for the tech giants to rethink how they serve teenagers. Independent research in 2018 suggests that 7% of all 13 to 15-year-olds say they have seen self-harm content over the previous 7 days. That's potentially millions of kids. January 2024, 7 years after Molly's death, Meta finally introduced safeguards that are designed to restrict content recommendations for self-harm and suicide material on accounts set up by teenagers on Facebook and Instagram. In 2018, Mark Zuckerberg admits that Facebook did not do enough to prevent these tools from being used for harm. Fake news, foreign interference in elections, and hate speech. He testified to Congress about the Cambridge Analytica scandal, in which the data from millions of Facebook profiles was scraped and used to target voters in the run-up to the 2016 election. Zuckerberg promised that Facebook would do everything it could to prevent interference in elections in the future. He flatly refuses to accept that the fundamental design of the platform is at fault. They just need to clean up the content. Facebook then embarked on the biggest digital cleanup ever attempted, spanning hundreds of languages and countries. The job will fall to a little-known group called content moderators. They're about to find themselves on the front line of an information war. Content moderators will now become the new gatekeepers. But who is responsible when things go wrong? Most people don't know how content moderation works. Here are some examples. Number 1, Roger Shoesmith is a complete tosser. This post would not be taken down if Roger Shoesmith was a public figure, which I'm giving a talk, aren't I? So public figures are not protected by bullying, from bullying and harassment. So that would stay up. Roger Shoesmith is a complete tosser. Can somebody go and give him a slap? I know where he lives. This one would be taken down because it's incitement to violence. Stop it, John. Roger Shoesmith is a complete tosser and a liar. He's been stealing stuff from work and abusing his colleagues. These are criminal allegations and not violating the Facebook rules, and the post would not be taken down. Firstly, these posts would be scanned by AI, looking for keywords or phrases that it thinks are indicative of hate, abuse, or harassment. A lot of stuff like pornography, child abuse, spam is detected by AI and automatically removed. Where the AI isn't sure of of where a user has reported, or where a user has reported it, it will end up with one of the content moderators, of which there are 15,000 that work for Facebook around the world. This system is what is supposed to keep Facebook and Instagram clean. Content moderators are not valued within the Facebook hierarchy, as they are seen as obstructing the main goals of the business, which are engagement and growth. On Twitter, at its peak, there were 500 million posts per day. Other platforms like Facebook are considerably larger. After the 2016 elections in the US, tech firms started to invest heavily in content moderation. This made the platforms better, safer, and less prone to manipulation as the 2020 election approached. Content moderation might have made social media a more pleasant place to hang out, but it sets them on a collision course with the most powerful man in the world. During the run-up to the 2020 election, you might remember the famous Nancy Pelosi speech. She was the Democrat Speaker of the House of Representatives. Pro-Trump trolls posted a video on Twitter of her speech in Congress, which was slowed down by 25%. In the video, she appeared to slur her words, and it came across as she was drunk in the House. There were no rules about this sort of manipulation, so a team at Twitter started to write some. They created a new policy to add a little note called a label to mark misleading or disputed tweets that might lead to harm. Twitter held the steadfast position that it was not the arbiter of truth. It would intervene on abuse, harassment, bots, and spam, but would not arbitrate on what was true and what was false. In 2020, Donald Trump posted a lie on Twitter. Gavin Newsom, a California senator, was rigging the election by sending ballots to voters. The tweet stayed up, but with a label. A few days later, George Floyd was killed by the police in Minneapolis. Trump tweets, "When the looting starts, the shooting starts." Nice. Twitter adds another label. Yoel Roth was the head of integrity at Twitter. Trump supporters came together and rallied against this so-called head of integrity and accused him of using his position to influence politics by labeling inflammatory posts. Roth was inundated with death threats and had to have an armed guard posted at his home. He became a public figure of hate. Whilst the persecution of Yoel Roth is not acceptable, it's also not crazy to think, it's not a crazy thing to worry about big firms making decisions about what is true and what is false. After Trump lost the election to Joe Biden, his Twitter account and those of his millions of followers started to build up anger and rage. Constant posts about stolen elections and fraud against the American people. We all know what happened next. Many of us watched it unfold on television screens. The storming of the Capitol. Let me see if I can get this in the right place now. No, back to him. That's the boy. You remember him, don't you? During the riot, Trump tweets, "Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done to protect our country and our Constitution. USA demands the truth." Yoel Roth told Jack Dorsey, that was the boss of Twitter at the time, that Trump's account should be suspended. He was overruled. Trump was asked by Twitter to remove the tweet, various other inflammatory ones. They disabled Trump's account for a period of 12 hours. A few days later, he was back with a stream of abuse. This time, Twitter executives decide to terminate his account. There have always been information gatekeepers. The BBC, for example, have made editorial decisions about what people see and hear for over 100 years, and they still do. Social media has leveled the playing field and set information free, just like the social media pioneers dreamed it would. In many ways, that's more democratic. The old gatekeepers, however, controlled information with professional standards and legal obligations, and in doing so created a shared sense of reality. Now everything's fragmented. Each of us has our own personalized information world, a world controlled by a small group of people and machines who we don't know, we can't see, and who don't really understand. On the face of it, these stories are very different from each other. The Molly Russell, fake news in the US election, Maria Ressa in the Philippines. Dig a little deeper and they're all the same. They're taking place in different parts of the world, that's all. This is what happens when you set information free and nobody is responsible for the consequences. Ian Russell felt that social media had played a significant part in his daughter's death. On the 30th of September 2022 was the final day of the inquest. Ian was warned by his legal team to be wary of the 3 Ds: deny, delay, deflect. We run our platform safely, etc., etc. Coroner Andrew Walker reviewed thousands of pieces of content, witness statements and testimony from social media companies. Meta's head of safety and well-being, Elizabeth Lagone, stated that she believed that all of the content viewed by Molly was admissive. Meta completely denied that their platform was an unsafe place for a child. Another witness was a child psychologist, and he told the court that the material Molly had viewed was so disturbing that he lost sleep for weeks after seeing it. The coroner's summing up was this, and I'll read it, because I haven't been reading anything during this, but I'll read this. It would not be safe to leave suicide as a conclusion. She died from an act of self-harm while suffering from depression and the negative effects of online content. It's likely that the above material viewed by Molly, already suffering from a depressive illness and vulnerable due to her age, affected her mental health in a negative way and contributed to her death in a more than minimal way. Now that didn't really feel like a victory, but Ian Russell's lawyers, they said it was a considerably groundbreaking verdict, and similar to the first finding by a coroner that asbestos had played a part in the death of somebody exposed to it. This led to sweeping changes in the law and better accountability for thousands of victims. So, it all started with a dream to connect the world, but the hunger for growth and engagement caused problems. Efforts to keep these platforms safe were pushing against the business model. Some mysterious force is deciding what we get to see. We're not in control anymore. On January the 31st, 2024, bosses from all the social media companies were lined up in front of a cross-party judiciary committee in the US Senate looking into online child protection. In the gallery that day were dozens of parents holding up pictures of their children. An 11-year-old girl died by suicide after being solicited for sexual exploitation on Instagram. 15-year-old boy died after a choking challenge on TikTok. 17-year-old boy killed himself after being bullied on Facebook. The list goes on. Mark Zuckerberg was made to apologize to the families present and the hundreds of families who weren't. The story of modern social media started back in 1996 when Congress created Section 230, the immunity law that meant that social media platforms were not responsible for what we, the public, posted on them. This was the foundation on which all social media is built. It's remained unchanged for the last 30 years. This year, a cross-party committee in Congress to investigate the possibility of repealing Section 230, which has held fast for over a quarter of a century. It's done this because big tech companies have powerful lobbying strategies. They are the biggest and most powerful lobby in the US. They spend millions of dollars every year on it. The truth is that they do it successfully. They've shut down every meaningful piece of legislation which threatens Section 230. If Section 230 is ever repealed, social media as we know it might disappear altogether. 2024 is a big year for elections around the world, Russia, US, UK, and others. Remember Maria Ressa from the Philippines, who tried to warn the world about the election manipulation on Facebook back in 2016. She believes that many of the problems that she witnessed nearly 10 years ago will be made worse by the advances in AI. A thing called generative AI is where machines can produce human-like content. What happens if generative AI is fed by social media content? ChatGPT-3 has already admitted that they're doing so. Garbage in, garbage out. Generative AI needs examples of human speech to learn how to replicate or mimic us. The biggest data set of human speech ever created is, you guessed it, social media. What's going to happen with all the elections in 2024? If you do not have integrity of facts, you cannot have integrity of elections. In 2024, there are no less than 90 elections worldwide. VDEM is a think tank in Sweden. Last year they said that 60% of the world is now under authoritarian rule. In January this year, that number went up to 72%. Maria Ressa was right in 2016. She tried to sound the alarm that the information ecosystem was in danger. What if she's right again? If she is, then 2024 will be a tipping point. Silicon Valley made a promise to democratize information and connect us all, and in many ways they've achieved just that. Social media has created a global village. The social media companies use a mixture of engagement-based ranking, complex algorithms, and content moderation. We have been sucked in over the last 20 years, and it has now turned into something darker and more chaotic. Is this radical experiment finally coming to an end? Finally, I'll leave you with this thought. There have been numerous examples of children coming to harm as a result of online experiences, including after being bullied or having sexual images shared on social media. Just going to do this now. No. I'll get this right, but it's the end now.
Consistent, Frank.
I am. According to the UK's media regulator Ofcom, more than a third of children aged 8 to 17 have seen something worrying or nasty online in the last 12 months. 1 in 3 lie about their age to access adult-rated content on social media. Consuming content on social media platforms is the most popular online activity for children, with 31% having posted content they've created themselves. Well done for staying awake, and thank you for listening.
Well, some food for thought there, eh? So who's going to be the first to kick us off with a discussion about this subject? Charlie.
Thank you for that. I think it was a very good speech and made everybody here think about a lot of things.
Thank you, Charlie. But
do
be gentle.
Yeah. Calm down there. And my feelings of it are, and I don't use Facebook very much anymore, and I am not on any other main things. It is getting tedious in many ways, but I think that there ought to be laws about, and this will be a very difficult thing, and I think it would be very sensible for children under certain ages not to be allowed to have a smartphone when they can do all that stuff. And also, I don't think anybody, unless they have been very carefully looked at and checked, should be allowed to put anything on social media anonymously. That's the main thing I believe to be true.
Yeah, that's a good question, but I agree with everything that you've said. And you might be surprised to know that China are leading the way in this, but they're an authoritarian government, aren't they? And I think they don't let, I think it might be 18, they don't let kids have smartphones. which you can do in China, can't you? But over here there would be. Can you imagine it over here? What would happen? What would happen to us?
Let's hear what Glynis has to say.
Glynis, please be gentle with me. I don't know much about social media.
A question from the Star Chamber. Is it working? Hello? Is that working?
Yeah, perfectly.
Do what like this?
Yes, like that. Thank you, Roger. I found that absolutely fascinating, your history. Tragic, though, because I can remember the enthusiasm when it all started. It was this great new thing. Let me take you back to, I think it was the late 1970s, early 1980s. In Watford College, I was in the tea room with an engineering lecturer. He had a history of military communication during the war, and he saw this new World Wide Web, which he called a mesh, as a military communications thing. And he was expounding to me how wonderful it would be, because every junction of the web had at least two possible means of exit. And if the communication went any further, then there were multiple options on the journey this message could take. It was the solution to all his communication problems, he thought. And looking back on that time, I realized where it all went wrong was practically everybody had their own idea of where this was going. And so we've ended up with this chaos, because nobody was really in control of it. My problem as a classifier of library books was where to put this new subject of computing. First of all, I thought, oh, well, it's mathematical. I put it in 500s. But then people from the management department, people from the engineering department, people from the art school were all saying to me, oh, we've got books on computing. Don't put them in with mathematics. So that was a problem for me. But I joined a British Standards Committee, and we decided that it was like encyclopedias and bibliographies of bibliographies, and should go at 00 right at the beginning of the thing, and that's where it stayed. But I can remember struggling to know where to put it. But when you think of what a brilliant information thing this internet is, and Google, in information work in the 70s, our main problem was trying to keep the information we gave out current. And we spent an arm and a leg on these expensive directories and marketing information which was out of date when it was published. And now you've got it on your phone at the touch of a button. It could be terrific, it could be brilliant, and it's all gone wrong. And I think this is so, so sad.
Thank you, Glennis.
Thank you, Glennis.
Do we hear any sort of advocates in favor of social media and the strength of social media? Andy?
Hi, I'm not necessarily going to advocate on social media itself, but I am going to maybe challenge this this sense that we've had. Although I do want to emphasise this, that was a great talk, Roger, and actually you hit most of the points that I was going to try and get you on. So you dodged
Thanks.
it,
Is that
like
before
Neo in the Matrix.
Before you bring the axe down?
Yeah. No. This is more just something that occurred to me. We've got a sense in this talk and in a lot of the responses of like a sort of conflation of social media with the internet in general, and this sense that social media is sort of like the inevitable conclusion of where the internet could have gone. Whereas I think in a lot of people who sort of study this, there's a sense of a divide between what they call Web 1.0 and Web 2.0, which is the point at which the Silicon Valley guys go from making hardware to making the software and the websites that that anyone, no matter what hardware they're using and no matter what they're interested in, is going to engage with the web on. And I think there's a significant qualitative difference between the way information was being shared and people were engaging with each other before sort of 2006 or so, something like that. That, I think, puts some of the points that have been already raised about anonymity and also the point about the case between Stratton and Prodigy into an interesting light. Because in Web 1.0, which was, I mean, people were still saying nasty things, but because these were all very contained small communities, they were able to self-moderate in a way that you can't really do at scale now. And the interesting thing that I was going to add about the Stratton versus Prodigy case is that Stratton were effectively the first ever producer of spam. They're basically responsible for what you get in terms of spam emails. They would take these small communities and then flood them so that they would become unusable with advertisement. So it was not a sustainable way of engaging with that, and what they were trying to prosecute was the community's reaction to that, which I think, from what I've seen, was entirely reasonable. And that strikes me as indicative of what I think the real possible issue might be, in that I completely agree that you're right to think that we need to think about this systemically. It's not just the content, it's the systems that produce it. And yes, part of that is the design of social media in particular. But then perhaps we need to think about what systems facilitate and motivate social media to be designed in that particular way, when it could have been designed in all of these other ways that we've seen throughout history.
Thanks, Andy. I wonder, do we have any thoughts about where the responsibility actually lies? I mean, is it all with social media? Is it all with the companies? Or what about the personal responsibility in families? So there's John here and, sorry, what? John. Mark. So John first and then Mark.
So yeah, John did a talk on AI, didn't you, John?
I did a little while ago, yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Rog. That was a really thought-provoking presentation. Very much appreciated.
Thank you.
It seems to me that these companies are profit-driven and completely unwilling and probably incapable of self-regulation. Therefore, do we not need a Ministry of Information to regulate what actually comes out on social media?
The conflict within the social media, the tech titans, is that there are two things pushing in opposite directions here, aren't there? There's trying to make it safe and moderating the content, and then there's engagement. And those two things are diametrically opposed, which is why the content moderators and the people who are trying to keep the harm speech off these platforms are right at the bottom of the pecking order within the hierarchy of social media companies, because it's all about growth. And yeah, just combining the two, what Andy was saying as well, it's what I've been reading recently, because I'm not an expert on this subject. I mean, I know you're probably surprised about that, but I've just read up a bit about it, and apart from the conflict, that constant conflict, there is a structural issue here, and it's not just the content. You're right. It's not just the content. It's the means by which that content is allowed to be viewed and who it's viewed by. And then you come back to Charlie's point, which something I think soon has got to happen at a government level with this. Because what you come down to with all of this lecture or whatever, is you come down to the safety of children. And that, for me, blows away all the other Donald Trump tweets and the Rodrigo Duterte, Philippines and all this. The fact that children now are, and those stats at the end there, those were from Ofcom. So, I mean, I don't know, that could be made up, but they were pretty terrifying. And if our children are exposed to this sort of thing, then I think it's up to government, because I think it's up to parents, but the parents need some help, and they will need, I think they need help by some sort of legislation. I don't know what it is, because I'm not a politician, but
Yeah. Let's hear from Mark, please.
Hi, I've been lucky enough to work in IT for 40 odd years, and I've lived and breathed a lot of what Roger's observed. But this can be solved because there's an organisation called the World Wide Web Foundation, which comes up with the rules about how the internet works. And that was founded years ago by Sir Tim Berners-Lee, who invented the internet. Now, the trouble is that organisation's a bit like the United Nations. There's countries like Russia, China, and other bad countries involved, and they won't agree to the rules. Whenever anything goes over the internet, you've got a header and a footer, and that's a bit like a postal address with a postcode on. That could be easily changed to include traceability to the initiator of the content. And that's what the World Wide Web Foundation are trying to get through at the moment. But like the United Nations, they can't agree on it. There's terrorist organisations who don't want it. Can you imagine Russia signing up to it? So the technical capabilities there, it's way beyond our government. It's a worldwide change that's needed.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much, Mark. Do you want to comment on that, or?
Not really, because I don't know anything about it.
Okay. Will.
Just point it at your mouth, Will. Point it at my mouth.
No, the other end.
We'll move on.
I hope it's not going out.
That's open mic technique, that.
Just a couple of points, really, from my perspective. Is first of all, thanks, Roger, for some interesting points there. I must have heard it every week for the last 52 weeks, on a Wednesday night, but there we go.
We'll stop it.
When it comes to any new technology that were unleashed upon us, I think we have these concerns. Is it going to work? Is it right? What safeguards should we put in place? So some of the concerns take me back to when we used to have a red flag in front of a train or a car because we didn't understand the technology that we have. But I think many of the points that you raise, we've all grown up with it. We've been fed information, taught how to think through the BBC, through the newspapers, and this is another example of how our thought process is being manipulated to some extent. And the final point really is the one thing that we can thank President Trump for after his last term in office is that we are now far more sceptical of what we read, what we hear, and what we see on the internet and the press in general. And I think the younger generation are far more up to speed to disregard far more that that they pick up on the internet. So that's it really. That's my contribution.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you,
Will.
yeah,
once they've disregarded it, just going back to the Veles thing, this North Macedonia thing, which is a crazy story really, but it didn't matter. Once you've clicked on it, and that's you don't have to believe it. In fact, they did research that fake news gets more clicks than true stuff. And once you've clicked, that's it. So Yeah.
We've been seeing that in the newspaper world for the last 100 years. Once the circulation numbers are up on the Daily Telegraph or the Guardian, that affects the way the polls go. So it's a similar sort of process, but we're just using a different technology to achieve the same aims, I think.
Yeah, good point. Yeah.
Danny over in the corner here, and then we've some more people here, Mark, but can we come to Danny first?
Hi, Roger. Thank
Hi.
you for that. That was really interesting.
Thank you.
I want to go back to the child safety aspect of it all. I'd like to preface it with saying that I'm actually very negative against social media myself. I don't enjoy it. I think it's a rather negative thing. However, in terms of protecting children, one of the most amusing stories I've seen in the last couple of years has been sort of pro-protecting children, in that someone that I've never even heard of before social media, Andrew Tate, got taken down in a human trafficking ring by a child herself, Greta Thunberg, through a sheer coincidence but of him posting himself on social media and being found by the police in that manner, by a pizza box of all things.
Pizzagate.
Yeah, Pizzagate.
Yeah.
So,
isn't it?
not
thing.
Pizzagate, no, but he was found because she picked up on a pizza box and
Pizza
said
box,
a
then.
smart comment about him recycling his boxes. But she was a child at the time and actually ended up protecting who can only guess at the figure of people that survived that because of that incident. And that was all down to one social media interaction that he started himself. So I'm just wondering if there's any other instances that you can think of where something like that's happened in a positive environment rather than a negative one.
I don't think I can think of Pizza Box Gate. Oh.
Do I just speak?
But
yeah, just to go back to the thing about children, I think there is a move. Just two recent things. One head in London is running a 12-hour day specifically to keep children off their phones, and providing a meal and their activities. And the recent murder of Brianna Gay, her mother is working overtime and trying to ban phones for younger children. And she has been at Downing Street and had a lot of publicity, and I think it will gather momentum, that sort of approach. But you're right,
Well,
I
that's
think
good to hear.
parents need help, but I don't agree that children are sceptical of the internet. I think I have 4 grandchildren, and I think they believe a lot of what they read. Okay.
Yeah, I think the point is, I think the point is that that they don't have to believe it. Its biggest influence is just nudging people slightly. The strength of the messaging that goes out through social media is that it's pushing you a little bit further, infinitesimal bit further, on something you already believe, and that's its real power. It's not a controversial story that you might see. It's something that you believe, and it pushes you down that route a little bit further. And then, because it's algorithmic, then you will get fed more of that particular subject, and it'll push you a little bit further every time.
Thanks, Roger.
Alex.
Yeah, for someone who doesn't know a lot about social media, well done, that was great.
How did you know that? Oh, I told you.
You told me that, yeah. So there's just a few points that people have brought up that I feel like I want to just touch upon. It's not really got a question, but it's more just like a talking point. Firstly, I think this is a symptom of what we've ended up with is a symptom of capitalism. So we've ended up with people just needing to make money. Just because you're a billionaire doesn't mean you're a good person or you have good morals, as we can see with Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk or anyone like that. But we rely on them to sort of lead the way. So we're talking about them coming up with their own rules and having their own moderators and things like that. And some people talking about independent bodies moderating this stuff, which I think is personally the way it's going to go, and I think it's the way it should go. Now, there is a world in which you could look at that as being totalitarian or, you know, something that China or Russia would do, and we don't do that in the West because we're a democracy and capitalism and hell yeah and all this stupid, you know, rhetoric. But really,
pharmaceuticals, smoking, medicine, media such as newspapers and outlets like anything run by the Murdoch family, all of that needs regulation, and all of it goes on without us seeing it. So we think, oh, they're choking our right to free speech, or they're censoring us, or whatever, but there are tablets out there that you can't take because someone else has decided that it's not safe for you to take it. And I think that's the way that social media is going. Now, I think what is unfortunate is that you can focus on the bad stuff, clearly. And there's loads of good stuff. People owe careers to it. People owe finding like long-lost, family members, like you mentioned, curing diseases, connection, all sorts of stuff. However, we're now catching up with all that bad stuff, finally catching up with it after what a lot of us would think is 20 years, but in reality is 40 years, something like that. And AI is already coming. So by the time we're getting around to regulating this, the next thing has already started, and we're way, way behind it. In the same way that we were with smoking, in the same way that we were with pharmaceuticals, in the same way that we have been in many things in our society. And I do think it's very easy to look at big tech and think, ooh, scary. But big tech is the same as all these other companies that we've had to deal with in our society. So I don't think people should be as terrified as it sounds like a lot of people are. Yes, it's scary. Yes, there are things that need sorting out. But there's also been many other things that our society's managed to sort out. Way more complicated if you came to think Ross Niger with the woman talking about the universe. If we can do all that stuff, then I'm pretty sure we can regulate social media. So I'm personally, as a young person, not scared about it. And I'm not a huge fan of social media by any means, but I do think that younger people are becoming better at self-regulating because that's the world in which they have to survive. So I don't think there is a need for so much fear. There are cases where that is the case, but I don't think it is a general thing. So I don't really have a question, but the final point is I strongly feel that you can't lay any of this at the door of any parents anywhere. If you were told that smoking was good for you back in the early 1900s, then you let your kids smoke, fine. You're dealing with the information that you've been given. You were lied to. The regulators and government and everything needs to be responsible so that the parents can then do what is right for their kids. Yes, there will be people that are flippant and are not very good at, being on it with their kids. But in general, I don't think you can blame the parents because they're fighting against Silicon Valley and the whole system effectively.
No, what I'm saying, I'm not blaming parents for anything.
Oh no, I'm not saying you were. I'm just
no, but I can see how people might want to. But what I'm saying is that's the first point of contact with the child is the parent, and I think the parents need some help right now with this, and that can only come from legislation, can't it? I don't know where else it's going to come from. I don't think it's going to come. I mean, it is coming from the tech companies as well. There's lots of measures, lots of safety measures been put in place. I just, you mentioned that the growth in this, in the technological growth now in social media we are now about to see a massive, massive change in social media. Section 230 won't be repealed, I don't think. So they're not going to all become publishers and all get sued. I think it's going to carry on. But I listened to, this morning only, trying to gen myself up on this, is an interview with Mark Zuckerberg, a podcast. And they're talking about Llama 3, which is his latest generative AI model. And every sentence was an acronym. So I had to keep stopping it and look it up. And they were just talking to each other in letters. And there is so much going on there with this generative AI now that is going to change the landscape.
Mark.
So
and then
Rog, fantastic talk. Thank you.
Thank you.
I was
wanted to have the microphone because of what Alex said, and I thought, well, thank you. That made me feel much better. And in actual fact, what you did was you reminded me about what my whole career was, because I worked in pharmaceuticals, and I was working in the most regulated environment that you have ever seen, because there's no way. And it was something that Rog said about how do you know what truth is, and big companies with truth, and I was working for a very, very big company, and we were working to actually understand whether a drug worked or not. It was about whether it was true or not, and we had our own processes to actually deal with that, which involved doing clinical trials and statistics and so on and so forth. But that was what we had to do, and it cost a heck of a lot of money to do that, and it's going to cost a heck of a lot of money to do the type of regulation that Alex is talking about. But it is possible. And so that's one thing. The other thing I wanted to say is that we've been talking about Facebook and the algorithms which do the geometric progression of producing, sending information to people. Now, one of the things that I'm very keen on is the idea of the difference between broadcasting and narrowcasting. And one of the narrowcast mediums that we use that I think is called social media, but I'm not sure, is WhatsApp, okay? But that's secret, okay? So once you're actually taking part in a WhatsApp group, it's secret. And nobody can tell what you've actually been saying or doing, even if it's really horrible. And I don't know how you deal with that.
Mark Zuckerberg can.
Can he see what's in your WhatsApp?
It's only encrypted, end-to-end encrypted for the punters. They've got that data.
Can we get down here? Yeah.
Michelle.
Hiya. Again, not really a question, but just picking up on what a few people have said is I don't necessarily think that in the short term the way to fix it is legislation, because we could be waiting for another 10 years for that to come through because no one wants to take responsibility, and that's a really hard thing to pass. And in the meantime, the tech is changing so much. It's like so quickly over that time, and there's so many children that are being affected in that time, while everybody up here is trying to make decisions amongst themselves. Everybody down here is having to live with it day to day, and people are affected by it. So personally for me, I think it all comes back again to education. And there are independent facilitators now who are trying to go on the ground in schools and tell people, this is what social media is like, this is how it's going to affect your life. But I think there should be more funding behind that into going into schools and teaching the younger people how to deal with social media. And there's a very small example is a kind of flippant, kind of jokey phrase that is used a lot, which is, you're responsible for your own algorithm. And when you put that into Molly's case, that's just horrendous to think that. But there is also a power in that phrase, in the sense that if Molly knew that she had the control to control her algorithm, and that she knew that when she was getting shown all these depression posts, actually if she started searching flowers, nice gardens, then the algorithm would change.
Of course it would.
I know that's just, just as an example, that it would change, but she didn't know that, and she didn't know how to use it. She wasn't, savvy about that. So I think if we are able to educate the children into being like, this is how it works, this is how you can work against it if it's not working for you, then we don't have to wait for everyone up here.
Good point, Shell. I'll just, good point. I just on the point of legislation, my dad used to not put his seatbelt on because it was imposing. The government imposed him strapping himself into. But when he put his head through the windscreen, he then started to do it. So what I'm saying is that legislation, that was imposing. I mean, we've got one now, haven't we, with smoking? We've got a smoking thing coming that approaches now. And And it's the same as the seatbelt thing, isn't it? Just we didn't like having to wear seat. Well, I say we. My dad didn't like having to wear seatbelts, but that was clearly a bit safer. He also, just on the subject of my dad, which it's not really about him, but he used to ride a motorbike when he was a youngster, and then they started making him put a great big cumbersome heavy hat on that destroyed his good looks. He didn't like that either. So anyway, I think there's room here for some limited legislation in this field because I'm seriously worried about kids.
Can I just say something? There's something about moving away from the actual content of the social media and all the algorithms and all the rest of it. There's an awful lot of information coming out now about the physicality of the smartphone's impact on the developing brain. So when you're taking young children, and believe it or not, 40% of under 10-year-olds in the UK own a smartphone. And the actual process of the smartphone and the interaction with it and the effect it has on the brain is altering the brains of our young children, regardless of what the content is that they're looking at, driven to keep engaged and keep flicking through it. So I mean, if we think about our young children, we wouldn't give them a loaded gun to carry around with them, but in a way, that's what they have. And I think education is great, but trying to compete with a rational part of the mind in a very young child to overcome the addictive nature of the actual device itself is itself a huge problem. Right, back to being chair. Who's next?
This lady here.
Great. I heard that. Was that yesterday? It was 30% of 7 to 9-year-olds have a smartphone.
I think it's higher than that.
Is it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
You've picked up on a point I was going to say. So my background is I'm a psychologist, careers advisor, 35 years working with young children, teenagers and university students. So I've seen the change, and I think social media's done nothing to help them whatsoever. Mm-hmm. So in terms of brain changes, their concentration spans now I've seen, and there's research showing that it's gone down. Yeah. They're living in not a real world. Their communication skills are changing because they're not learning to talk to other people. Mm-hmm. They're just interacting with a machine. Mm. So it's not just content. Yeah. It's many, many levels where it's damaging children. And I probably sat down one-to-one and interviewed at least 50 teenagers every week in, week out for years. And I saw a complete change. So it's influencing their lives in just even being able to relate to people, never mind the content that they're getting in. Yeah. But they're living in an unreal world. Yeah. So I think it should be, my personal view is it should be stopped. Mm-hmm. They should not be allowed to access it at all. Yeah. I've had 3 students commit suicide because of stuff that they got involved with even on the dark web, because some of them are so clever, they can access the dark web as well. So it's not just social media. So I totally agree with you. And yeah, from a psychologist's point of view, it's definitely affecting the way the brains are developing.
Yeah, there's been an exponential rise in rates of anxiety and depression in young children over the last 10 years. And there's without doubt all the evidence points to a very strong correlation. Mark would talk about establishing the causality of that, but great.
I see another half a hand up.
A half a hand? Oh, Andy, you don't want to say something else, do you? We're all getting thirsty now, so Andy will be the last. Okay.
Everyone get ready. I'd like to thank Alex for saying the C word, because I feel like I'm not allowed to. So to build on what Alex was saying, and also, Rog, what you're talking about between this conflict between moderation and growth, I think the obvious thing to me is that there is no benefit to the end user to this as whatever social good it might purport to be of the endless growth, and the growth is simply just identical with surplus value and the profit motive. So to me, the really simple solution is that we have an alternative to this kind of communication that isn't run for profit. We have some sort of municipal social media or some sort of some of the federated alternatives that aren't then designed in such a way to compel you to keep on using them and to engage in that geometric model that you're talking about, so that you can still communicate, but you're not addicted. And I think what we've been talking about with the physicality of the devices and how they become addictive in themselves, I think that's a related question. I think that's that's just the design of the interaction, even setting aside what you're interacting with. That's also just designed to be as addictive as possible.
Thanks, Andy. Is there anybody else before we wrap up and get ourselves a drink before we die of the thirst? One more point here. Very last one.
Hello. It's the first time I've been to this.
Well done. You're very welcome.
Much, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I have been teaching for, I don't know, since 1967. I'm now 77, and I still teach on a voluntary basis. And the difference I've seen over an awful lot of time. I'm also the grandmother of 5 children, 5 youngsters, from the ages of 8 to 16. Some of them have smartphones, some of them don't. But from a teaching point of view, I would totally agree that the children, because everything is so instant, research, wanting to look at a book, wanting to read, is failing. And I'm not blaming anybody for this, either teachers or parents, but I think control of the person who actually gives the smartphone or the phone to the child has to really think very carefully about the consequence of giving them instant access to information. Information is great, the internet is great, but as a boring old mother, grandmother and teacher, I would actually say keep the kids reading. And if they can read and understand and comprehend and listen and not just have the damn ear-poddy things stuck in their ears, they will actually... I sit on the train sometimes from Manchester to London, and nobody looks out, and even the children are sitting there on these blooming screens. Babies are being pushed, and they're looking at screens. So a lot of responsibility does come back to parents and grandparents and our generation, who actually brought all this in its fulsome. So thank you very much, Roger. I've enjoyed that.
Well said. And I think
can I come again?
We should have an embargo on earpoddy things.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for a really engaging and interesting discussion. And I'd like to put your hands together for our speaker tonight, Roger.
Thank you. Thank you.
He'll be available at the bar for further interrogation.
Thanks, Bill. Well done, you.